Good afternoon. Welcome back to another episode of yours truly, Inside the Gridiron, today's NFL. So for this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers and how, obviously I'm a fan, so how their season has unfolded. And I have a special guest with us today, Mr. Bills Mafia, Luke Waller, NFL expert / analyst. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Isaac. Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Glad to be here.
So I brought on Luke because I was like, well, he is a NFL enthusiast and real good friend of mine. We have a lot of disputes sometimes over the football world and just the current outlook of the AFC.
Correct.
Because I don't like the Bills, but I have respect for the Bills. And I would assume that you would say the same for the Steelers. Again, I don't know.
Ditto on the Steelers. I would definitely agree with that statement.
So you definitely agree. Okay.
For sure.
So I want to get into a little bit of what you think about the Steelers right now. I mean, the Steelers are sitting at 8-2. They had a recent win over their arch rivals, the Baltimore Ravens.
Yes.
Who, as a Pittsburgh fan, I hate. Let me say that for you. I hate the Baltimore Ravens. And I would think as a Buffalo fan, you're not too fond of them either.
I can't say I am. We own them in the playoffs. Regular season is a different story. The Steelers, for me, I think a lot of people didn't really expect them to be, I'll say elite. I think people expected them to be good. I think the main thing people were concerned about with the Steelers at the beginning of the season and throughout much of the offseason was the offense. The offense, for a lot of people, was the question mark because you had Russell Wilson, who had a abysmal time with the Broncos. He had a terrible time with the Broncos.
In which they benched him.
Correct.
Because they basically didn't want to pay him anything.
Exactly. They went the old, we don't want you to get injured, and then we're stuck with you.
And for those who don't know, sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
Russell Wilson was, for his longest part of his career, was with the Seattle Seahawks.
Correct.
Then he went to the Denver Broncos in the 21-22 offseason
Yes.
and spent about 2 seasons with them. And those 2 seasons were mauled by partial injury, terrible offense, bad coaching. I mean, they had Nathaniel Hackett the first year in Denver.
Yes.
And he was supposed to be this coaching guru because of the job he did as offensive coach in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. That was total opposite. They fired Nathaniel probably a few weeks in, almost a month in, I'd say.
Yes.
And then Sean Payton came in and just, it never worked out. And now you see Russell Wilson is so happy to be a Steeler. I mean, just look at this photo from the recent win over the Baltimore Ravens. I have not seen Russell Wilson look like that in a long time.
Yeah,
So,
he's
what you were saying.
He's definitely thriving in a new environment, but I don't know if a lot of people certainly expected that because I think if you look at the if you compare the offenses of the Denver Broncos and the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Broncos have a better wide receiver core, or at least they did when Wilson played for them. You can argue that the running back room is better in Pittsburgh, but a lot of people were saying, well, Wilson had a lot more weapons in Denver. He had a better opportunity there, and frankly, he stunk. Now, whether or not that was his fault, we're seeing pretty clearly in that he is performing very well with this Steelers team. And a lot of people didn't think that was going to happen. They had to manage the beginning of the season without him. Justin Fields played. And that was another problem, too, because
went 3-2.
He ended his Bears tenure with a huge question mark. He was playing well. He was playing better than he did his previous seasons. But people weren't exactly sure, myself included. I was a big detractor. I didn't think the Steelers were going to do much this season, just purely based off of how the offense looked.
So you're a more offensive guy. You used to play O-line. I know
Correct.
that for sure. And you know how the offense of a team works. So, I mean, the Steelers sitting 8-2. They're first in the division in the AFC North, which is one of the most highly contested divisions in the NFL, just because you have so many teams. There's 4 of them, to be exact. Every division has 4 teams, and they all are at each other's throats.
Sure.
The Steelers are third in the AFC,
Yes.
behind Buffalo at 2 and Kansas City
Correct.
at 1. Some of the key wins that we know the Steelers have had so far are against the Ravens. The week before, they beat the Washington Commanders in
Huge
a
win.
1 point, game, 28-27. Yeah, a huge win that we were not favored in at all. And player performances have a big part of it. I mean, George Pickens is sitting at number 4 in the NFL. George Pickens, for you guys who may not know, is the number 1 receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he sits at number 4 in the NFL in receiving yards with 728 total yards. And that comes from 48 receptions in just 10 games played, according to ESPN.
Yep.
So he has made some spectacular catches we've seen. I mean, he had an early touchdown against Washington. That was really like, you said it was a moon ball.
Amazing touchdown.
It was great.
He's a great sort of, I like to call them acrobatic wide receivers. They guys like Pickens excel in making those star catches and in going deep. He connects very well with Wilson because Wilson likes to throw it deep, and he's very good at it. Like you said, a moon ball, this big arcing throw that kind of goes over the cornerback's head and just lands right in the arms of the receiver. And that's what Pickens specializes in. And he's had like 3 or 4 of those touchdowns already this year. And that's where a lot of his yardages come from, was from those deep, long throws. The rest of the wide receiver core is doing its job. Calvin Austin's very good. They haven't even really incorporated some of their pieces. I know Roman Wilson, I believe, is...
Roman Wilson, a number 2... round 2 draft pick from Michigan, was great in Michigan, but has not played a game in the regular season at all because of a ankle injury.
Yes.
He's been sidelined. I have yet to see how he's going to do. I'd love to see, because he was a stud in Michigan.
He was.
As a Penn State Nittany Lions fan, it's crushing to see Michigan and Ohio State, beat us up every year, but he was a great player when they played us last year. So I mean, but just these stats, I mean, Russell Wilson, we talked about him. He's got a 94.4 passer rating with a 60.3% completion percentage. He's made 73 completions on 121 attempts per ESPN. And this is in 5 games. He's thrown already for over 942 yards. So this talk of Russell Wilson's washed, Russell Wilson's not going to do a good job, totally out the window.
For sure.
Totally out the window. And you had Justin Fields, who, like Luke said earlier, was coming from Chicago. He was a draft pick in the round 1 of the NFL draft a few years back, coming out of Ohio State. This guy was poised to be the best thing since sliced bread. Right. And the Chicago Bears did him silly.
For sure. Fields was put in a very difficult spot, and he did his best to sort of work his way out of that. And I think sitting behind Wilson will be good for him, for sure. He did a good enough job to keep the Steelers in the race at the start of the year, and I think that's what they expected out of him.
Yeah, I mean, we went 3-0.
For sure.
We beat in week 1 Atlanta, where we kicked 7 field goals.
Right.
I got a friend that we call Big Man, Mr. Pierce Vetri, who's got our kicker Chris Boswell in his fantasy lineup. I mean, this guy, he's another unstoppable force.
Guy's a monster.
They used to call him Wizard of Boz. I think he should get that moniker again. But what I'm getting at is we beat the Falcons in Atlanta, who they're poised to be a great team, and they're only 6-5 right now, pretty sure. You played the Chargers at home, beat them, and they were supposed to be great with this guy named Joe Alt at the offensive line. And I'm sorry, that was the week 3 matchup. Week 2, we played Denver. We beat them. So we went 3-0. Then we take a 2-game losing streak, one of the Colts.
Yes.
One to who I can't stand, the Dallas Cowboys, who my friend Pierce is also a fan of, which the Cowboys are just atrocious right now. But then we went on a 5-game winning streak, and we're here right now. We've beat the Giants, the Jets, the Raiders, the Ravens, the Commanders. I mean, the Jets were supposed to also be like great, and
the best.
You're a Bills fan, so
right. So
it's hilarious.
Of course, it's hysterical coming from this perspective, but it's interesting to see how the Steelers win games. They're not really blowing their opponents out. Their offense is efficient. Their offense is not high producing. And I mean, in my opinion,
but does it need to be high producing?
No, not really. Especially when you have a defense like the Steelers, where you're able to settle for a field goal and know that the team you're facing is either going to have to settle for a punt or settle for a field goal themselves. And that's really what the Steelers have been doing this whole year. They've been able to get their opponents off the field regularly, and it's doing very well for their chances because it doesn't really matter if you're blowing teams out. In my opinion, I think a hard-fought, scrappy win is better than a just completely destroying.
Yeah, because
the other
defense
team.
wins games. I mean,
sure.
Bill Belichick has said it numerous times, who's the former 6-time Super Bowl winning head coach for the New England Patriots. Defense wins games. I mean, you brought up defense. TJ Watt has had a huge impact on the team again this year. He's done great. He had a strip sack against the Giants late in the fourth quarter when the Giants were running down the field to try and tie the game. This was week 8 in Pittsburgh. It was about 3.5 minutes left in the game. The Giants were down 8 points, so a one possession game. This big beast of a man came rambling down on Daniel Jones and just swatted the thing out of there.
Slapped it right out.
Watt has 7.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles midway through the season, and 3 pass deflections, according to ESPN. So you talk about defense.
Yes.
Big strengths for the Steelers right now.
Probably their biggest.
Yeah, which takes us into our next segment, which is strengths and weaknesses. So we know the Steelers have had this same old tough Pittsburgh Steelers defense backed up in huge part by the veterans TJ Watt, Cam Hayward. We have Patrick Queen now from Baltimore, who had a huge game against Baltimore.
Excellent pickup.
You know,
for sure.
It wasn't great in the beginning of the season. He wasn't doing, and he's linebacker. For all who don't know, he's a linebacker, and he wasn't producing at first.
Yeah.
And then that game, according to head coach Mike Tomlin for the Steelers, he was fired up the entire game and was telling his coaches and teammates, "You got to calm me down. You got to calm me." But you know, when you're playing against a divisional rival with the Baltimore Ravens, and you have a guy like that come in,
Right.
anything is going to happen. Okay, I mean, special teams has been great. I talked about the kicker Chris Boswell. He has been the AFC Special Teams Player of the Week twice this season so far.
Yeah, exactly. He's been doing good. They definitely. The Steelers, from what I've seen, have never really had a problem on special teams. Boz has been playing extremely well. He's won 2 games for them single-handedly this year already. He's managed to sort of cement himself as this, force on their team. I believe he's tight end 2 in fantasy right now.
No, he is. So I have that here.
He's outscored several.
So listen to this stat. According to Sports Illustrated, here's a list of some of those NFL players whose Boswell has more fantasy points than this year. Travis Kelce, tight end 1 for the Chiefs.
Yep.
We all know about Travis Kelce and his infamous relationship with Taylor Swift. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 1 for the Rams. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 1 for the Seahawks. A.J. Brown, wide receiver 1 for the Eagles. Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 1 for the Dolphins. And Jonathan Taylor, running back 1 for the Colts.
I mean,
this is like, it's a kicker.
It's unbelievable too.
A kicker.
And just to pivot back to the defense, which I think is something that you'll be interested in talking about. They play an efficient game. They're very good at shutting down whatever the opposite team is trying to pull out. You've come up against some very creative head coaches and offensive coordinators so far this year. You shut down a Ravens team that was just bulldozing opponents for the better part
and
of
their
the entire
OC
year.
is Munkin, right? Todd Munkin,
Yes.
who's done a great job with the Baltimore Ravens. All due respect, I don't like Baltimore, but what that genius of a mindset does, taking Lamar Jackson, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, in my opinion, right now behind Josh Allen. Sorry, Ravens fans. So I got to give a shout out to you there. But what he has done with that offense since what it was last year, we know the Ravens had a great season last year. Came up short in the AFC Championship to the Chiefs,
For sure.
who won the Super Bowl. So what he has done, taken the offense to new heights, but you're right, outdoing offenses that are just, they were number 1 in the league coming into that game.
Yeah.
Number 1 in almost every single stat.
And you held them to 16 points.
We held them to 16.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the lowest point total they've had this year on offense. I could be wrong.
Well, let's take it out.
It's
I mean,
definitely
the
towards
Ravens,
the low end.
It definitely has, and that's always how it is against the Steelers and Ravens. It's always a one-score game. It's never so. So here's the Ravens' games this season. They lost the first game 27-20. They lost the second game 26-23. They won their third game 28-25 to the Dallas Cowboys. They beat the Bills 35-10. They beat the Bengals 41-38 in overtime. They beat the Commanders 30-23. They beat the Bucks 41-31. They lost to the Browns, the 2-8 Browns, 29-24. They steamrolled the Broncos 41-10.
Yes.
They beat the Bengals again 35-34. And they lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers 18-16. That is their lowest point accumulation this season. That is the lowest they have scored in a game. And let me tell you something. Chris Boswell, 6 field goals in that game. We didn't score a touchdown once. Is that nice to say as a Steelers fan? No. But when you're winning games because of your field goal unit, when you're winning games because of your, in my opinion, Hall of Fame kicker, who's been in Pittsburgh for over 7 years now, that needs to be highlighted more.
Yeah,
he did the same thing in Atlanta week 1. He kicked 7 field goals, and we beat the Falcons 21-18.
Drilled them too, and I mean it speaks to how tenacious the team is. They find ways to win, and that is something that you love to see as a fan of a team. Knowing that they are tenacious and that they can go out and say, you know, we might be down X amount of points, we're going to come back and win it, or we might be up X amount of points, we're not going to let them get back in it. It's great to see, and it's definitely indicative of a team that wants to keep doing well, and I think a team that saw sort of these talking heads and these sports analysts say, well, they're not going to be that good this year, and they're going to underperform, and they want to make, you know, they want to prove a point. They want to say we're
the Pittsburgh Steelers,
right? We're going to do something this year.
We may have not been good in the past few years. I mean, with Kenny Lowlight Pickett, which I was riding high on when we drafted him in round 1 of the draft a couple years back, coming out of Pittsburgh because he had a great senior season, and he just was a dud. I want to talk about, we've talked about some strengths. Let's talk about a little bit about weaknesses. You were a former offensive lineman in high school.
Yes.
So when you look at the offensive line for the Steelers, to me, that is a weakness in itself. And I'm a Steelers fan saying that. At the beginning of the season, a lot of injuries.
Yeah.
Our round 1 draft pick, Troy Fautanu, out of Washington University, got hurt.
Yeah.
He's done for the season. We have currently Broderick Jones, Mason McCormick, Isaac Seumalo, forget the other 2 guys, but that is our O-line right now.
It's a decent O-line core. It's not exactly horrible. They're doing well enough to win, and they're doing well enough to, I think, especially now in this part of the season, blocking for their running back.
That
Najee Harris is very good. He, of course, you know, his freshman season was the one that everyone talks about, but he has been doing extremely well this year. The problem with
Zach
an
Frazier
O-line,
and Dan Moore were the other ones I forgot.
Okay, so the problem is when you do draft someone that high, who's going to come in and help out, you know, in the trenches. Injuries suck because you plan for things that are otherwise, you know, it's difficult because you come into the season and you're like, okay, we've got this unit, we've got these guys, and everybody knows each other's tendencies and everybody knows each other's strengths and weaknesses. And then when someone goes down, you have to adjust to whoever's coming in to replace them. And sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. And I think for the Steelers, they've taken a little while to adjust to that problem. It also didn't help that they were playing with a quarterback who they didn't think they were going to be blocking for.
Justin Fields?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because he's running everywhere.
Yeah, and Fields is a very, obviously, an extremely different play style than Russell Wilson is. So, and that requires an extremely different blocking scheme and play style from the O-line. So, after Wilson has come in and sort of solidified his place, it's gotten better, for sure. It's just something that they need to keep an eye on. And I thought maybe that they were going to address that at the trade deadline. They didn't end up doing that, which you can say whether or not they were trying to. But hopefully they've addressed that in-house.
Yes,
and
I agree.
Looking at ways to sort of take that weakness away from opponents in the future.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we have a word from our sponsor. So we'll be back in a jiffy.
All right.